Hi, I'm Rob. I'm a program manager working on Microsoft 365, and my team focuses on scenarios relating to mergers, acquisitions, and divestitures. I'm really happy to be here today to showcase some of the progress that we've made in these areas.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sesha Mani. I'm a Principal Group Product Manager at Microsoft. My team leads the security and compliance areas in SharePoint, OneDrive, and Microsoft 365. In this video, I'm happy to join Robert and share with you our progress on mergers, acquisitions, and divestiture scenario.
This session is for IT administrators and decision makers. You will learn about new tools to help with cross-tenant content migration in Exchange and SharePoint, as well as branding and collaboration features. We will also provide additional information about related items on our roadmap. First, we'll recap the challenges customers face today and the feedback we've heard. Then we'll summarize our vision for addressing these customer challenges and demonstrate new cross-tenant features in action. You'll see Mailbox migration in the Exchange Admin Center, SharePoint and OneDrive moves, domain sharing for email, people search, and multiple organizational themes in the same Microsoft 365 tenant. Let's talk through some of the challenges that we heard from customers. When one company acquires another, and they both have Microsoft 365 tenants, they are faced with a decision about what to do with those tenants. Sometimes when a whole tenant is acquired, it makes sense to keep it separate. For instance, in conglomerates where there is a lot of autonomy and independence between business units. However, often customers need to move the acquired users and data across tenants. For example, users within the same tenant have the most feature-rich collaboration experiences. In a single tenant, you automatically get a common global address list, the look and feel of a single organization, the best Teams experience, and so on. We're making investments to improve the cross-tenant collaboration experience, but users collaborating in the same tenant still get the richest collaboration experience across the M365 suite. Another reason to consolidate tenants is when you have a size mismatch between the existing tenant and the tenant being acquired. It doesn't make sense to keep small tenants around in a large company. For example, if you have a company with a single corporate tenant with hundreds of thousands of users, it doesn't make sense to keep numerous small tenants around with hundreds or only thousands of users because it adds management overhead. In general, this is Microsoft's approach when we acquire new companies that have Office 365. We typically migrate the users and data into our corporate tenant. Finally, we have scenarios where a whole tenant is not being acquired or divested. Of course, many acquisitions and divestitures involve carve-ups where only a subset of users and data are acquired. Or some users are divested to one company and others are divested to another company. In these partial divestiture scenarios, cross-tenant moves are really the only option. Now let's talk about branding-related challenges. Branding challenges differ depending on the nature of the acquisition. In some cases, the acquiring company wants to use its existing brand on the acquired business or product lines. For instance, a few years back, Microsoft acquired a mobile phone business and applied the Microsoft brand to that business and product line. In that case, the acquired users needed Microsoft.com email addresses on day one, prior to any user migration, but a domain can only be used in one tenant at a time. To get around this limitation, customers sometimes use email address rewrite solutions, but we don't offer a cloud-based solution for this today. Other times, users simply have to log on to multiple mailboxes to get all their email. On the other hand, sometimes the acquiring company wants to keep the acquired brand. For example, when Microsoft bought LinkedIn. Now, SharePoint sites can already have different branding applied to them, and a single tenant can have different email domains, but we haven't offered a way to have multiple organizational themes in the Office web applications within the same Microsoft 365 tenant. Now I'd like to hand over to Sesha to talk about some challenges related to data migration.
So Robert talked about the branding challenges. Let me cover on the data migration challenges. We rely heavily on the partner ecosystem to provide you migration tools And they have done an amazing work with variety of tools that are available now to migrate across tenants. However, we also heard a lot of feedback from customers. The first and foremost is better throughput. With massive amount of data that needs to be migrated across tenants, it takes a long time, sometimes even multiple months. The APIs, protocols that are used by the third-party tools were not designed for the cross-tenant migration. Second of all, we need a better migration experience for both end users and the administrators. In general, the admins need to plan for a multi-month project, and they have to deal with much downtime as well. Users, on the other hand, especially the ones that are being moved across tenant, they get suboptimal experiences like email downtime, their old SharePoint URLs are broken, and so on. The third challenge we have heard, or the feedback we have heard from customers, is that the choice to be able to choose first-party tools as well as third-party tools, and in some cases, combination of both, in order to meet their fullest needs of mergers, acquisitions, and divestitures. And we have been looking into this particular complex and business-critical problem, and we are excited to share with you our vision in this video session. Now, before I share our specific vision for these scenarios, let's take a classic divestiture scenario. In this picture, Fabricam wants to divest their investment banking business group to Contoso. As the picture on the left shows you, investment bankers like Jeff McDowell and so on, and the resources like SharePoint sites of the investment banking group are currently with Fabricam. The picture on the right shows the end state of the divestiture, where Jeff McDowell like investment bankers are moved to Contoso along with their OneDrives and mailboxes. And also the shared resources like investment banking SharePoint sites are also moved over to Contoso. So from the lens of Fabricam, it's a divestiture scenario, whereas from the lens of Contoso, it's an acquisition scenario. In this scenario, a subset of users and resources are being moved from Fabricam to Contoso. And this is a very common scenario. There is also a flavor where you may want to move all the users and resources to Contoso from Fabricam, which is in other words called merger. You're completely merging the Fabricam tenant with the Contoso tenant. These scenarios are functionally, if we look at it, they are nothing but cross-tenant data move. That is, user Jeff McDowell's OneDrive and Mailbox need to be moved to Contoso from Fabricam. The shared resources like SharePoint sites being moved to the Contoso tenant. The business reasons might vary, however, be it a divestiture scenario or an acquisition scenario, but under the hood, they are nothing but cross-tenant data move. Our vision for M&A aims to provide you a comprehensive platform solution covering all these scenarios. First of all, functionally speaking, acquisitions and divestitures are the two sides of a coin. They have a common end-user expectations, business lifecycle processes for admins to be able to address them. They also require a common capabilities in Microsoft 365 platform. Second of all, it's really about data move across two tenants, from source to the destination. Subset of users and data need to be moved across the tenants, and to achieve better throughput, we aim to not require any intermediary to move the content across the tenants. Third, and in my opinion, the most important value we want to offer you is the fidelity and seamless user experiences for those who are being moved across the tenants. For example, ensuring the access is intact for all the moved users for their resources upon completion of the move. Also, during the merger and the divestiture time, there is coexistent experience for the users, such as people search across the tenants during that time of merger and divestiture. Last but not least, unified experience and approach across all Microsoft 365 services. Specifically, the core services like Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams. Given the engineering complexity, we will be taking a phased approach and deliver values to you in multiple phases.
Thanks, Sesha. Now let's get started with the demos. Our first demo showcases cross-tenant mailbox migration. We'll see the settings that Microsoft 365 admins need to configure to securely migrate mailboxes across Microsoft 365 tenants. Then we'll walk through the steps to schedule a migration batch in the Exchange Admin Center and monitor the migration through to completion. We'll also experience the migration from the perspective of a user called Jeff, as his mailbox is migrated from one tenant to another. Let's take a look at the source tenant from the admin's perspective. The admin has already run a script to set everything up. The first thing to highlight is that we have an organization relationship with the destination tenant that enables the mailbox move capability and specifies the direction. In this case, the direction is outbound. The organization relationship also specifies the security group whose members are allowed to move. In this example, we have a group called ADV Encrypt 1, and we can see that Jeff McDowell is a member of this security group. That means his mailbox is in scope for a move. If Jeff were not a member of this group, we wouldn't be able to move him. Finally, we have a property called OAuth Application ID. As part of the setup, admins in both source and destination tenants need to consent that this application has the permissions required to move mailboxes across tenants. At this stage, Jeff's mailbox is still in the source tenant. The admin has run a get mailbox commandlet to display properties on Jeff's mailbox. As part of the setup, admins need to copy properties like Exchange GUID and other mail-related attributes from Jeff's source identity to his destination identity. Switching now to Jeff's perspective, here we can see Jeff is logged into his mailbox in the source tenant using his identity in the source tenant. He has an email in his inbox from Rob, and they're getting ready to start the project. Now let's take a look at the configuration in the destination. Similar to the source, admins have already run a script to set everything up. And we have an organization relationship with the source, only this time the direction of the moves is specified as inbound. We also have a migration endpoint that contains information used by our migration service to move mailboxes. And note the application ID. This is the same application ID that we saw on the source organization relationship. This time, let's take a look at the properties of the application using the Azure portal. Here we can see exactly which permissions the admins have consented to. Before we migrate Jeff's mailbox, let's take a look at his identity in the destination. Here we can see that he's represented as a mail user in Exchange Online, and that key attributes like Exchange GUID and other mail-related properties have been copied from the source. This is how the mailbox move process matches Jeff's source account with his destination account and ensures the mailbox is attached to the right identity. Now that we're ready to move Jeff's mailbox, the admin has logged into the Exchange Admin Center in the destination tenant and is going to create a new migration batch. Let's call the batch Migrate Jeff. This is a migration to Exchange Online. The type of migration is cross-tenant migration. There's a list of prerequisites, but we've already been through all this. Next, we select the migration endpoint that corresponds to the source tenant we want to migrate from. And we import a CSV that contains the list of users to migrate. In this case, the CSV only contains Jeff's entry. We'll specify the target delivery domain, and we'll leave the other items blank. Now we get to schedule the batch. We'll configure it to automatically start and then manually complete the batch later. Now that we've saved this, batch creation is in progress. And we can see it's successful. Checking back on the status of the migration, the admin can see that this batch has synced to 100% and is ready for completion. When the migration batch has been completed, users in that batch will be required to log on using their new identities to access their mailbox in the destination. Separating the initial synchronization from the completion is useful because it allows admins to complete the migration batch in a predictable cutover window. Now the admin will complete the migration batch. And the operation was successful. Now the admin can see that the status of the migration batch is set to completing. The admin in the destination tenant can also use PowerShell to get information about the migration batch, as well as individual users being migrated within the batch. Here we see the get migration user commandlet has been run against Jeff's mailbox to get additional information about what's going on with his move in particular. Checking back on the status in the Exchange Admin Center, the admin can now see that the migration batch has completed successfully. Using PowerShell in the destination tenant, the admin can see that Jeff now has a mailbox instead of just a mail-enabled user. And looking back at the source tenant, the admin can see that Jeff's mailbox was converted to a mail-enabled user object, and that the external email address refers to Jeff's new mailbox address in the destination. As long as this mail user object is kept in place, Jeff will still be able to receive mail on his old address, and it will get forwarded to his new address. Now that Jeff's migration is complete, he's logging in using his destination identity, and he's still able to see the contents of his inbox. Notice here's the email from Rob that we saw earlier. Now we're looking at Rob's mailbox. Rob got the reply from Jeff before Jeff was migrated and really doesn't know anything about Jeff's migration. But that's okay. Rob is going to reply back to Jeff and say, let's start. Switching back to Jeff's mailbox, we can see that Jeff received the mail from Rob, even though Rob replied using Jeff's old email address. This is working because the mail-enabled user object that we saw in the source is forwarding mail to the destination mailbox. The demo showed the key components that make cross-tenant mailbox migrations work. So let's cover a few additional points that we didn't show. We didn't show the end-to-end setup process. Admins typically run a setup script to ensure that everything gets set up correctly. First of all, this service is secure by default. Admins in both the source and the destination tenants need to go through the required steps to set up the relationships, configure the scope in the source, and consent that this is okay. But either side can unilaterally remove the relationship and disable moves. Second, the service is robust. We use the Mailbox Replication Service, or MRS, for cross-tenant moves. And this service is already used for onboarding moves, multi-geo, as well as service load balancing at scale. Finally, the service is efficient. We use direct migration from tenant to tenant, and the data does not traverse a middle tier. Now, let's hand over to Sesha for the SharePoint and OneDrive demo.
We have an exciting demo lined up for you, showcasing for the first time ever the cross-tenant content move in SharePoint in Microsoft 365. We also have some surprise features to showcase to you as well, so don't miss it. Let's roll the demo video.
Thanks, Sesha. So yeah, I'm going to show what happens when the Fabricam and Contoso administrators want to move a user's OneDrive and a SharePoint site from Fabricam to Contoso as part of a divestiture. So I'm logged in as Jeff, an investment banker in the Fabricam organization, and we're looking at the investment banking SharePoint site. We have some news posts on here and some documents and a SharePoint list containing client information. And we've also taken some of our documents and shared them with guests outside of the organization. So our marketing strategy document here has been shared with Sesha, who works at Woodgrove Bank, which does business with Fabricam. And now we're going to see what happens when the Fabricam and Contoso admins want to move Jeff's OneDrive and the SharePoint site over to Contoso. So the first step of that is that the Contoso and the Fabricam admins have to establish a trust. And this has to be done on both sides. So they're going to create an org relationship. So the Contoso admin is going to trust Fabricam, and then we're going to switch over to the Fabricam side. And the Fabricam admin is going to trust Contoso. And we've already done this ahead of time. So what we can do is we can run another command to verify that the trust has been set up properly. and see that it's working before we go ahead and start moving things across. So we're going to verify that the trust is in place. And if we run this, it's going to check and let us know that we're good to go ahead with the migration. And it tells us that we're good to proceed. The next step is that the admins need to set up an identity map. So we're moving Jeff's OneDrive across, and we're moving a SharePoint site, and we have different people and groups that have access to that site in Fabricam, and we want to make sure that the corresponding users and security groups have access on the Contoso side. So what we're going to do there is build something called an identity map, which is just a CSV file where we identify the users and the groups that we want to have access on both sides, and map them between the security groups in Fabricam and the corresponding users and groups on the Contoso side, so that when the site and the OneDrive move over, everybody has the right amount of access. Once we've done that, we're then going to upload the map and get ready for the actual move. So we're going to show how to move the OneDrive, which is that you set up a user content move like this. And we've actually already kicked this one off, but what we're going to show in detail right now is moving the SharePoint site. So to do that, we're going to kick off a move of the site that you saw earlier from the Fabricam to the Contoso side. So we're going to kick that off, and it's going to let us know that it's started. And then we have a status command that we can use to come check how that's doing. And once that lets us know that the move is done, we can come back and take a look in just a minute. Okay, now that it's been a few minutes, we can come back and check on the progress of our move. We're going to take a look at the state of this site move, and we can see that it says success right here. So now we know that the site has been moved over from Fabricam to Contoso. So I'm going to log in to Contoso as Jeff, the investment banker from Fabricam, using my new Contoso account. And here I am. I'm logged in as Jeff, but this time I'm Jeff at Contoso, and I'm here on the Contoso organization, and I'm here at my investment banker's SharePoint site, which has been moved over. I've still got my news and my documents. You can see that everything that was posted or modified by Jeff at Fabricam has been updated to become Jeff at Contoso, because we've done that identity mapping that we showed earlier. Our SharePoint list and our documents are here. And if you remember, we also had that document that we shared with Sesha, who was from Woodgrove Bank, who was from another organization that did business with Fabricam. Well, that's this marketing strategies document. And if we want to take a look at how that works from Sesha's point of view, we're going to flip over to Sesha's account at Woodgrove Bank. And Sesha has in his email a link that Jeff from Fabricam shared with him. And if we open this, it's going to try to open the document on the Fabricam side, but along with the move, we've put a redirect in place so that when Sesha tries to open the document, he's going to get redirected to open the document on the Contoso side. And since we did that permission mapping, he's still going to be able to open it. So if we've shared out our documents or if we have links, those are still going to work, and we're still going to be able to access documents and sites. So coming back one more time to the SharePoint site where I'm logged in as Jeff at Contoso, I can also go to my OneDrive, which we moved earlier, and see that my OneDrive is here as well. And all of my documents and folders are here. Everything belongs to Jeff at Contoso instead of Jeff at Fabricam. And I'm basically able to pick up things where I left off.
As we showed in the demo, user Jeff McDowell and the investment banking sites are moved from Fabricam to Contoso. It's a matter of running few PowerShell commandlets in the SharePoint PowerShell module in both the source and the destination tenants. By the way, did you identify the surprise feature we showcased? If your answer is the mechanism to keep the old sharing links work, then you got that right. We have a redirect site left behind in the source so that we can provide you this cool feature to keep your old sharing links work, such that if somebody clicks the old link, it will redirect them to its new destination in the Contoso tenant. Now, let us see what are the key points to take away from this demo. As prerequisites, you just need to establish the trust and then set up identity mapping for the users and the security groups that are being moved from source to destination. To trigger the data move across the tenants, use the simple PowerShell commandlets in SharePoint PowerShell module. For example, to move a site, use the start SPO cross-tenant site content move. To move the user's OneDrives, use the start SPO cross-tenant user and content move commandlets. These move operations are based on our multi-geo move operations, and hence they offer a seamless scheduling capability as well for the administrators, and also the smart gestures that I'm going to talk about now. The unique capability in this move experience is the redirect site behavior. As I mentioned earlier, in the source, we leave behind the redirect site so that the old sharing links or bookmarks that the end users might have created will just continue to work. As many of the SharePoint administrators inherently know already, the URLs typically get broken upon any migration or move processes. But in this cross-tenant content move, much like multi-geo content move that we have, the old URLs continue to work as this experience is super critical for the end users. Not only the users that are being moved, but also for the collaborators that the users have been working with, both internal and external to their organization. Now, let's take a quick look at the various use cases and experiences to think through in a typical SharePoint and OneDrive site. There are three major aspects. Starting with end user experiences, sharing links will continue to work, as I explained earlier. The OneDrive and SharePoint sites maintain access for the moved users. Users can simply re-sign in with their new identity in their Office and sync client experiences and access the documents. There is no complexity there. Now, looking at in the lens of administrator and security perspective, the SPO SharePoint administration and Security and Compliance Center administration on the destinations tenant can now see the new moved sites and the users, and they can start manage and administer them. Security policies like sharing and sensitivity labels can be now configured to secure the content that got moved over. And also, you can govern those content using DLP and e-discovery like governance features. Next up, the SharePoint has shared services platforms such as search, profile, taxonomy, and so on. The users in the destination can now start to search for the content that got moved over. And also, these moved users will also get the profiles in the destination tenant as well. Power Automate flows and Microsoft Graph and apps that are associated with the SharePoint site, they need to be re-instantiated in the destination URL. With that, let us just switch gear to the coexistence story during the merger and divestiture period. Now, let me request Robert to take it over and cover the coexistence chapter. Robert, over to you.
Thanks, Sesha. Now that we've seen cross-tenant content migration in action, let's take a look at a couple more features that work across tenant boundaries: domain sharing for email and people search. We anticipate that these features will be useful during the coexistence phase of a migration, as well as for companies that need to stay in separate tenants for an extended period of time. This demo provides an early look at two exciting new features: domain sharing for email and cross-tenant people search. Domains are an important part of brand identity. Companies with users and data spread across multiple Microsoft 365 tenants often need to appear as a single company to the outside world. And internally within the company, finding people, no matter which tenant they're in, is the first step in collaborating with those people, sharing resources, and so on. And in both cases, the existing solutions can be costly and complex, with additional infrastructure to set up and maintain. For example, to make users across multiple tenants appear like they're in the same email domain, customers use email address rewrite solutions. On-premises Exchange server can perform address rewrite, but Microsoft does not offer a cloud-based solution for this. To enable finding people across tenants today, customers often use directory synchronization solutions to create local objects in each tenant. Let's talk through our demo scenario and then see how the new features can help. Rob, Brian, Shruti, and Georgia are all employees of the Microsoft 365 Demos company, but they are spread across different tenants in Microsoft 365. Megan is an employee of Contoso Electronics working on a project for the Microsoft 365 Demos company. Let's take a look at the Microsoft 365 Demos.com tenants and see how they're set up. This is the tenant that owns the Microsoft 365 Demos.com domain. You can see that it's set up as an authoritative domain type in Exchange Online. Next, we have a new type of inbound connector with a trusted organizations parameter. The purpose of this connector is to ensure that mail from the other tenant where Microsoft 365 Demos.com is used is viewed as internal and as trusted. Next, we have a series of get mailbox commandlets showing Brian, Georgia, and Shruti all with @Microsoft 365 Demos.com addresses. And finally, we have a mail contact for Rob. Rob has an @Microsoft 365 Demos.com address, as well as a unique address for his mailbox in the other tenant. Now we're looking at the other tenant where Microsoft 365 Demos.com is in use. Here you can see it's been added to Exchange Online, but this time the domain type is internal relay. This is a new configuration for the Microsoft 365 service. If you're familiar with Exchange Hybrid, this is similar to what you would see when a domain is shared across Exchange on-premises and Exchange Online. Now we're enabling a similar configuration across two tenants in the cloud. Next, we have the inbound connector, similar to what we saw before, to ensure that mail from the other tenant, where this domain is used, is trusted and viewed as internal. And finally, we have a get mailbox command for Rob. Note that Rob's primary SMTP address is using the @Microsoft 365 Demos.com domain. This is important because it means that when Rob sends mail, this is the domain that the mail comes from. Having seen the users spread across multiple tenants, let's take a look at cross-tenant people search in action. Here, Rob is logged into Bing for Business using his work account. Remember that Brian is in a different tenant from Rob. But Rob doesn't know this. In fact, he doesn't know what a tenant is. He's just an employee of the company. So he searches using Bing for Business for Brian Day, and he gets his work results because he signed in using his work account. Now he can see Brian's title and his contact details. Of course, it works for Shruti as well, and Georgia. In this example, there are multiple Georgias. The results return the Georgia from the same tenant that Rob's in, as well as the Georgia in the other tenant. There are a number of ways that Rob could narrow the search. He could use the title, or the department in this example, or he could use the location. In this case, Rob knows that Georgia is in Seattle. But to prove this is working, let's search for Georgia in London. This will fail because there is no Georgia in London. And it does. But we can see that Georgia in Seattle succeeds. Let's take a look at the experience in Outlook on the web. Here Rob is again signed in with his work account, and he can use the search bar to search for colleagues like Shruti and Georgia, and see results from users who are spread across multiple tenants in the company. Next, Rob needs to send an email to Brian to talk about getting the project started. So here Rob sends the mail to Brian. Now we're logged in as Brian, and we can see that he received the email from Rob. If you look at Rob's details, you can see that his email address is the @Microsoft365demos.com address. Brian responds to Rob using one of the suggested responses. When Rob gets Brian's response, he can see that it came from Brian at Microsoft365demos.com. So what this shows is that two users spread across two tenants in the same company can have email addresses in the same domain. They can find each other. They don't know, and they don't need to know, that they're spread across different tenants. Let's pivot over to Megan's experience. Megan works for Contoso Electronics and recently met Rob and Brian at a trade show. There they discussed starting a new project together. So Megan is going to follow up with Rob and with Brian by sending them an email. Back in the Microsoft 365 Demos company, both Brian and Rob received Megan's email, and they're both going to respond. First, Brian will respond. And Rob already got Brian's response and is also going to respond. When Megan receives the replies from Rob and Brian, both replies come from @Microsoft365demos.com's domain. Rob and Brian look like they work for the same company. For the final demo, let's take a look at a new feature that enables multiple brands within the same tenant. This feature will be useful for customers after an acquisition has completed and users have been migrated into a single tenant, but there's still a need for multiple brands. As I mentioned earlier, we already have the capability to support multiple brands on SharePoint sites and on email addresses. You can also change the default look and feel of your Office web applications by defining an organizational theme for your company. This feature allows you to use your own company logo on the top navigation bar and to change the colors so that Microsoft 365 reflects your brand. We're introducing 3 capabilities that make organizational themes better in Microsoft 365. First, we're enabling administrators to define more than one organizational theme for each tenant. This allows you to define multiple themes in your tenants and use Microsoft 365 groups to determine which users get which themes. Second, we're adding support for you to specify a mobile-specific company logo, which is optimized for smaller screens. And finally, we know many of your users love to use dark mode, and we do too. So we are enabling you to specify separate logos that work well in dark mode. Fabricam is a conglomerate using Microsoft 365, and they have recently acquired Van Arsdale, a relatively small company. When Van Arsdale users are migrated into the Fabricam tenant, they need to retain Van Arsdale's brand. So Fabricam wants to define a separate organizational theme for the Van Arsdale users. I'm signed into Fabricam's admin portal as a global administrator. I navigate to custom themes by going to Settings, Org Settings, Organization Profile, and Custom Themes. You may see that the interface has changed. If you already have an organizational theme defined, you will see that your existing theme is now renamed to Default Theme. But it still has all your current settings and will continue to work as it does today for all users. Now I am able to create an additional theme via the Add New Theme option. Let's call it Van Arsdale. Next, I need to choose the Microsoft 365 group that the theme will apply to. The rest of the options on this page haven't changed. Now I've navigated to the Logo tab, which is brand new. Previously, you could only define a single logo, and now you can define up to 4. The first is the default. The second is the alternate logo, which is optimized for dark mode. The third is the small default, optimized for mobile devices. And the fourth is the small alternate, or dark mode on mobile devices. Notice the previews you get for each of these so that you can see what they look like. To start with, we are asking that you specify these logos as publicly accessible URLs. I have my logos stored on my Azure subscription, but you could just as well use OneDrive or any other service. Now I'm on the Color tab. We've made two important improvements here. First, we have a built-in accessibility checker. It will give you a warning when the colors you choose don't meet the minimum accessibility standards. But since this is an admin setting, you do have control to override this recommendation if needed. We also have an instant preview at the top that allows you to see how your theme will actually appear for your users. Now let's hit save, and we're done. Now Charlotte Walton logs into the Fabricam tenant. She's one of the Van Arsdale users, and she can see that she has the Van Arsdale theme in the Office.com experience. She gets this theme because she's a member of the Microsoft 365 group for Van Arsdale users.
Thank you, Robert. So that was a cool set of demos for you in this video session. We started with cross-tenant migration in Exchange mailboxes, SharePoint sites, and OneDrives, and then we touched on domain sharing and people search, finished up with branding themes. Now, let's wrap up. As we showed in these demos in this video, we are starting with Exchange, SharePoint, and OneDrive services. We also plan to look at Microsoft 365 group, mailbox, and site migrations, as well as Teams chat migration for cross-tenant as well. Similarly, the licensing requirements for these scenarios are to be determined. We will share more details with you as they become available. You can check out for latest information at aka.ms/M365MNA. I want to finish with a couple of call to actions. First, check out our roadmap site for the updates on these features rolling out status. Second, if you are interested or your customer is interested for these scenarios that we talked about, nominate yourself at the following short links. For cross-tenant, OneDrive, and SharePoint at aka.ms/SPOMNA preview. For domain sharing for email at aka.ms/domain sharing preview. And then for cross-tenant people search at aka.ms/cross-tenant people preview. On behalf of Microsoft, we wanted to thank you for your time listening to this video session today.
I'd like to echo Sesh's thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed the content and found it useful, and I look forward to working with many of you in the future as you try out our new features.